Collins, I swear to God, if you don't answer this phone. Simone Hayes ended the call, shoved her phone into her coat pocket, and pulled the flask tighter under her arm. The steel was still warm against her side. Oxtail soup, slow-cooked from scratch in a guesthouse kitchen that barely had 2 working burners, made the way her grandmother made it, with thyme and garlic and the kind of low heat that couldn't be rushed. She had made it for Collins, her little brother, the one who had stopped calling 6 weeks ago and apparently stopped existing while he was at it. Seoul in November had opinions about the cold. Memphis had never prepared her for this. She found Hangang Tower without trouble, glass and steel, and the particular silence that expensive buildings practice like religion. She stood at the elevator bank, realized the resident elevator needed a key fob she didn't own, and turned just as a man in a delivery uniform stepped out of the second elevator. He held the door with his elbow, his hands full of packages, and she stepped in without thinking. He reached past her and tapped an access card against the panel before the doors closed. A routine gesture, something he did 30 times a day, nothing he thought about. She pressed 4. The elevator registered the card, still active from his tap. It went up, and kept going. When the doors opened, Simone's first thought was that she had pressed wrong. Her second thought came when 3 men in dark suits turned toward her like one organism, hands moving to their sides in a way that made her stomach drop straight through the floor. She didn't scream. She stepped back half an inch, felt the elevator door seal behind her, and tightened both hands around the flask. I'm looking for apartment 4B. Her voice came out steady. She was proud of that. If this isn't it, somebody really needs to fix their elevator. Silence. Then from the far end of the room, without turning around, a voice. It isn't. He was at the window. Tall. Still. The kind of still that wasn't relaxed. It was chosen, practiced, the stillness of a man who had taught himself not to move unless he meant it. He held the phone in one hand and kept his back to her. One of the men stepped forward. Simone sidestepped, clean and quiet, the way a woman does when she has spent her whole life making room for herself in spaces that weren't built for her. That was when Kwon Taeyong turned around. Dark eyes, a jaw carved to hold tension, a scar running along the left side of his face, thin, deliberate, the kind her anatomy training told her immediately was not from any accident. He was younger than the room suggested. He looked at her the way people look at things they don't have a category for yet. And then the smell reached him. The flask lid had been slightly loose since she left the guest house. A thin thread of steam had been escaping the whole ride over. Slow braised oxtail, garlic thyme, Scotch bonnet, something deep and dark underneath. It drifted through the cold, scentless, expensive air of the penthouse and did something to it. Changed the temperature of the room without touching the thermostat. He didn't move, but something moved through him. Something his face almost showed before he put it back. She's on the wrong floor, he said quietly. Show her down. Then, almost as an afterthought, so low it barely carried, he said it to the man nearest him without taking his eyes off her. Find out who she is. The men stepped away. One of them walked her back to the elevator without touching her. She kept her spine straight and her eyes forward the whole way. In the corner of the ceiling, she caught the small red eye of a camera tracking her movement. There was another one at the elevator panel. She looked away and kept walking. The doors closed. The numbers fell. She exhaled so hard her whole body shook. Upstairs, Kwon Taeyong stood alone. The smell of that soup was still in the room, still doing something to the air, to the walls, to the space behind his ribs that he did not have a name for. He had not smelled a home-cooked meal in 8 years. Not since the last evening his mother was well enough to stand in the kitchen. He stood at the window a long time. His phone rang twice. He didn't answer. Apartment 4B was empty. A neighbor told Simone through a half-open door that the young man had moved out weeks ago. Left in a hurry. Didn't say where. Simone stood in that hallway and breathed through her nose for a full 10 seconds. Collins Anthony Hayes, 24 years old, called home every Sunday without fail for 3 years. And then one day, nothing. No argument. No warning. No goodbye. Just silence where her brother used to be. She looked down at the flask in her hands. Still warm. Okay, she said to the empty hallway. Okay. She took the elevator down, sat on a bench outside the building, and stared at the $200 balance on her banking app. 3 nights left at the guest house. No leads. No plan. She didn't cry. She had cried herself dry somewhere over the Pacific. What she had left was fury. She looked up at the building. All that glass, all those floors, all that quiet. And she made herself a promise that she was not leaving Seoul without her brother. What she didn't know, couldn't have known, was that somewhere above her in that penthouse, a man who ran half of this city's private financial networks was still standing at the window, still breathing in the last traces of her soup, still trying to understand why 8 years of carefully maintained numbness had just cracked open over a loose flask lid and a stranger in the wrong elevator. And she didn't know that within 4 minutes of walking out of that building, he already had her name, her flight record, her guest house booking, and exactly why she was in Seoul. He knew who Collins Hayes was. He knew where Collins was. And he was already deciding what to do about it. If you're just finding this story, welcome. Drop a comment and tell us where in the world you're watching from. And please hit the subscribe button to help this channel grow. The police station smelled like fluorescent lights and paperwork. The officer was kind. He listened. He typed. He printed a form and slid it across the counter with the practiced expression of a man who delivered the same news 30 times a week. Missing persons cases involving foreign nationals on student visas are processed through a separate department. 4 to 6 weeks, typically. Simone stared at the form. He's 24, she said. He's my little brother. I understand your concern. I don't think you do. She took the form. She walked out. She was standing on the sidewalk, deciding which direction to fall apart in, when a woman appeared beside her. Tailored coat, hair pinned back with the kind of precision that said she did everything that carefully. Her English was deliberate and exact, chosen word by word, like someone who had learned the language for professional reasons and used it that way. Ms. Hayes. Simone turned slowly. You have about 3 seconds to explain how you know my name. My employer knows where your brother is. Calm, unbothered. He is safe, unharmed. There is a financial matter involved that can be resolved. My employer would like to speak with you. Your employer. Yes. The man from the penthouse. The woman, Haun, she said, didn't blink. Yes. Every sensible instinct Simone had fired at once. This could be a trap. This could be coercion. She was alone in a foreign city. She barely had money for her next meal. And a stranger who knew her name was asking her to get back in a car toward the same building she'd stumbled into 24 hours ago. She thought about Collins's voice the last time they spoke. The way he'd laughed too quickly when she asked if everything was okay. The way she had let it go because she was tired and had an early shift and told herself she'd check in properly next week. There was no next week. If anything happens to me, Simone said, I have the name of this building, your face, and I've already sent both to someone back home. She hadn't, but Haun didn't need to know that. Nothing will happen to you, Haun said. You have my word. I don't know what your word is worth. No, Haun agreed. You don't, but you're here anyway. Simone looked at her a moment longer. Then, let's go. Back in the penthouse, in the cold light of day, Kwon Tae-yong was a different kind of imposing. He sat behind a wide desk, jacket on, hands folded, the scar catching the afternoon light. A man stood quietly near the far wall, still, positioned, the kind of presence that wasn't decorative. There was another near the door. She counted them without making it obvious. Your brother entered a private card game 4 months ago, Tae-yong said. No greeting, no preamble. He lost significantly. He borrowed to cover it. He has not repaid the amount and has not made contact with anyone connected to the lender. How much? He told her. The number hit her like a door swung open into her face. She kept her expression still through pure will. He's not a criminal, she said. He's a kid who made a bad decision. Most debts start that way. So what happens to him if I can't pay it? He stays where he is until the matter is settled. Where is he? Safe. That's not an address. No, he said. It isn't. She wanted to flip the desk. She breathed instead. What do you want from me? He was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that wasn't hesitation. Just a man who had learned never to speak before he was ready. A temporary position. Household coordination. Managing the kitchen and daily operations of this residence. 3 weeks. At the end of that time, I will absorb the debt. Consider it settled. She looked at him carefully. You have staff. I do. So this isn't really about the household. Something moved across his face. Gone before she could name it. Do you want to see your brother or not? Haun was watching from the side of the room with the focused attention of a woman who had already formed an opinion and was waiting for it to be confirmed. Simone noticed. She didn't care. I want to see Collins first, before I agree to anything. A pause. Then Taeyong nodded once. They drove 20 minutes to a building in Yongsan. Quieter neighborhood. Modest exterior. Haun waited in the car. Taeyong stood at the end of the hallway while one of his men knocked on a door. Simone noticed the man sitting on a chair outside the apartment before the door opened. He had a phone in his hand, and the particular stillness of someone whose job was to be exactly where he was. He didn't look at her. He didn't need to. His presence said everything it needed to say. Collins opened the door. He looked thin, tired. His eyes found Simone, and he had about half a second before his face crumpled entirely. Simone. She crossed the hallway and grabbed him so hard he stumbled. She held on with both arms, her face pressed against the side of his head, and she didn't say anything for a long time because there were no words big enough for what was moving through her chest. He was shaking. She was shaking. You scared me, she said finally. Her voice was completely gone. You scare me so bad, Collins. I know. He was crying openly. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You better be. She held him another minute. Then she pulled back and checked his eyes the way a nurse checks a patient. Present, coherent, physically intact. She exhaled. She walked back to Taeyong. 3 weeks, she said. He nodded. I want to see him every other day. Another nod. And I need a real kitchen. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. Just a loosening. The kitchen is fully equipped. It better be. That night she cooked because anxiety needed somewhere to go. Collard greens and skillet cornbread. Her grandmother's recipe. The one made for evenings when the ground had moved under your feet and you needed something that tasted like it had always existed. She expected to eat alone. At 9 o'clock, Taeyong walked through the kitchen. He didn't speak. He stood at the far counter with a folder open, reading. She didn't offer him anything. He didn't ask. Down the hallway, she could hear the low sound of the front door engaging. Automatic locks cycling at a set hour. The building had rhythms she was still learning. Not all of them were comforting. She went to bed at 11. When she came back to the kitchen, in the morning the cornbread pan was empty. Rinsed. On the drying rack. She stood there looking at it. Haun appeared in the doorway behind her. Mr. Kwan has a 7 o'clock. Breakfast should be ready by 6:45. Good morning to you too, Simone said. Haun left without responding. Simone looked at the empty pan one more time. Then she turned on the stove. And somewhere in the quiet of that morning, she couldn't explain why the sight of a rinsed pan felt like the beginning of something she didn't have a name for yet. But it did. It absolutely did. A rhythm settled in that neither of them named. Simone cooked every evening. By the end of the first week, she had learned Taeyong's schedule the way nurses learn patients. Not because anyone told her, but because she watched. He worked until 8. He took calls between 8 and 9 that he never put on speaker. The hallway outside his office had a guard after 10 who changed shifts at 2 in the morning. She knew because insomnia had introduced her to the sound of that exchange on her third night. After 9, the penthouse itself went quiet in a way that felt less like peace and more like a held breath. He always ended up in or near the kitchen. He never asked for anything. He just appeared, folder in hand, jacket loose in one button, standing at the far counter like a man who had wandered in by accident and found no compelling reason to leave. She started talking to him on the 4th evening. Small things. What neighborhood she'd walked through. Whether he ate anything that wasn't delivered to him on a tray. He answered in the fewest possible words. She kept going anyway. Do you actually like Korean food, or do you just eat it because it's there? He looked up from his folder. What kind of question is that? An honest one. I'm Korean. That's not what I asked. A pause. My mother made doenjang jjigae every Friday. I haven't had it since she passed. Simone went quiet for a moment. Then, how long ago? 8 years. She turned back to the stove. She didn't push further. She let it sit in the room without trying to fill it, which was something most people couldn't do. He noticed. He stayed in the kitchen an hour longer than usual that night. On the 6th evening, she asked about the scar. Car accident, he said, without looking up. No, it wasn't. He looked up. The line's too clean, she said. Too linear. Blunt force from glass or metal leaves irregular scarring. That's a contact wound, something with a straight edge. She plated the rice without looking at him. I studied anatomy for 2 years. You don't have to tell me. I'm just saying it wasn't a car. The kitchen was very quiet. You're observant, he said. You're evasive. He almost smiled. She caught the edge of it before he pulled it back. He never answered the question about the scar. But the next morning, she found a small jar of doenjang paste on the kitchen counter. No explanation. No note. She stood there holding it and laughed. Really laughed. The first time since she'd landed in Seoul. Because only a man with absolutely no idea how to be warm would try to communicate entirely through fermented soybean paste. She spent 2 hours that afternoon on her phone, looking up the recipe. She called her aunt in Memphis who had Korean neighbors. She watched 4 videos. She made doenjang jjigae that evening from assembled memory, approximating, adjusting, tasting. When he sat down and took the first spoonful, he went completely still. He stopped. Close? She asked. He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was quieter than usual. Very close. I've never made it before. I know, he said. It's still very close. She watched him eat and felt something move through her chest that she chose, deliberately, not to examine. Haun watched all of it from the hallway, with the expression of a woman doing arithmetic and not liking the answer. The following afternoon, Simone visited Collins. He was steadier, eating, reading, working through the specific shame of a person who has been rescued and has to live inside that fact. The man outside his door had been replaced by someone new. Collins said he was polite enough. Said he'd once quietly mentioned that another person who'd borrowed from the same source hadn't been given an apartment or a guard, had just disappeared for a while before turning up considerably worse for the experience. Collins said it like a warning to himself. Simone heard it that way too. Is he good to you? Collins asked. The man upstairs. She thought about the doenjang paste left without a note. The rinsed cornbread pan. The way Taeyong stood in the kitchen every evening without ever admitting that was where he'd meant to be. He's fine, she said. Collins looked at her the way younger brothers look when they know their older sister is lying, but love her enough to let it go, for now. That evening back at the penthouse, Taeyong came to the kitchen earlier than usual. She noticed but said nothing. They ate in the same room. Not together, still at opposite ends, but the distance felt different than it had a week ago. Less like caution, more like a measurement both of them were taking. My mother used to say that a person who cooks for strangers has either a very open heart or a very heavy one, he said. Out of nowhere. Simone looked at him. Which do you think I am? She asked. He looked at her for a long, quiet moment. I think you came here with both, he said. She had no response to that. The fact that she had no response told her something she wasn't ready to sit with yet. She started washing dishes. He stayed at the counter. Neither of them said another word. But neither of them left, either. 2 people. 1 kitchen. The particular alchemy of proximity and isolation doing what it always does when the right 2 people are placed close enough together for long enough. Here's a question worth leaving in the comments. Do you think Taeyong knows yet what is happening to him? Or is he still telling himself this is just an arrangement? Drop your answer below, because where this goes next depends entirely on that. Mr. Beck arrived on a Wednesday with a paper bag of street food and the particular energy of a man who had decided long ago that his opinion was welcome whether requested or not. He was 58, soft-spoken, and the only person in Taeyong's world who spoke to him like a human being rather than a title. His English was careful and measured, selected deliberately, the way a craftsman selected tools, and he used it only when necessary, switching to Korean the moment formality allowed. He had been Taeyong's father's closest advisor and had transferred that loyalty to the son without being asked or compensated additionally for doing so. He walked in, stopped at the kitchen doorway, and inhaled. Taeyong, he said, in Korean, pleasantly. There is a woman in your kitchen. She works here. Also Korean. He set his bag down and poured himself tea with the ease of a man at home. What does that smell? Braised short ribs. American style? Yes. Mr. Beck looked at Taeyong over the rim of his cup with an expression that was entirely too knowing for 9 in the morning. She cooks like someone who loves the people she feeds, he said, casually, like a weather observation. It's a job. Of course it is. He sipped his tea. You look rested, by the way. Better than I have seen you in years. I sleep the same. I didn't say you were sleeping more. I said you look rested. He smiled. There is a difference. Taeyong looked at him steadily. Mr. Beck looked back with the serenity of a man holding every card and in no hurry to play them. He changed the subject and didn't return to it. He never needed to. He had always had a gift for placing things in rooms, and leaving them to grow on their own. Simone came back from visiting Collins as Mr. Beck was putting on his coat in the entryway. He looked at her with the immediate, uncomplicated warmth of someone who had made up their mind in the first 10 seconds. "You are the one feeding him," he said. In English, carefully. "I'm the one cooking," she said. "Whether he eats is his decision." Mr. Beck laughed, fully, genuinely, and looked back at Taeyong with an expression that communicated an entire paragraph. Taeyong found something very interesting to look at on the floor. Collins had been in better shape that afternoon. He apologized properly this time. No deflection, no performance, just a man sitting across from his sister with his hands flat on the table accepting what he'd done. "I didn't call because I was ashamed," he said. "I know. I thought I could fix it before you found out." "Collins." She leaned forward. "I'm your sister, not your judge. You call me when things fall apart. That is the entire arrangement. That's what I'm for." His eyes went red. He looked at the wall. "I thought you'd be disappointed." "I'm disappointed," she said. "I'm also here. Both of those things are true, and they always will be." He reached across and pulled her into a hug that lasted too long, the kind from when they were children, and something had frightened him past the point of dignity. She held him back just as long. That evening she made the short ribs, slow braised, seasoned the way her mother seasoned things, with more intention than measurement, more memory than recipe. Sweet potato mash on the side. The penthouse filled with a smell that was thick and warm and deeply southern in a way that had absolutely no business being in a Mapogu high-rise. Taeyong sat at the kitchen counter, not standing at the far edge, not hovering near the doorway with a folder as cover. He sat directly at the counter on the stool closest to where she worked, like a man who had finished negotiating with himself and reached a quiet conclusion. She didn't comment on it. She set a plate in front of him without a word. He ate. She watched him take the first bite of the ribs and go still. That same private stillness she'd seen over the jjigae, the stillness of a person being reached somewhere they'd closed off and forgotten about. "It's good," he said. "I know. You always say that. Because it's always true." He looked up. She was already turning back to the stove. He watched her move through the kitchen, unhurried, capable, completely at ease in a space that wasn't hers, and something in his chest shifted in a way he recognized distantly as dangerous. "You would have made a good nurse," he said. She turned. "Would have. Will." She studied him for a moment. "That's the first thing you said that assumed I have a future." He didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. And the silence between them had changed quality. No longer the silence of two strangers being careful. Something else now. Something that had been building one evening at a time and had finally reached a weight both of them could feel. Ha-eun stood in the hallway after the kitchen light went off. She had been doing the same arithmetic for days, and the answer was always the same. She understood now what was happening. She understood it the way you understand weather. Not because you want it, but because the signs have been too consistent to misread. She went to her room and didn't say anything to anyone. Some losses arrive quietly. That doesn't make them smaller. 2 weeks in. 1 week left. Simone started checking flights without meaning to. Not buying, just looking. Open tab she called research. Taeyong became harder to read. More formal in the mornings. More present after dark. The contradiction lived in the penthouse like a third occupant neither of them acknowledged. On a Thursday night, she came back late from Collins, and the penthouse was dim except for the kitchen. Taeyong stood at the counter with a cup of tea he wasn't drinking, staring at a fixed point on the counter that held nothing. She almost walked past. She didn't. "You're up late." "I don't sleep much." She pulled out the stool across from him and sat down. She hadn't made the decision consciously. She just did it. Why not? Habit. That's not a reason. He looked at her. "You ask more questions than anyone I've ever met. You answer fewer than anyone I've ever met. So we balance out." Something moved through his expression. That particular thing she'd learned to watch for, the private shift that happened in his face right before he said something true. "It started after my mother died," he said. The house was quiet in a way it hadn't been before. She was always up early, cooking. The smell would reach me before my alarm did. He turned the teacup slowly. After she was gone, the mornings were just silent. I stopped being able to sleep through them. "How old were you?" 26. "And your father?" "A month before her. Different reasons." She let that settle without rushing past it. "So you lost both of them in the same year and then inherited all of this?" "Yes. And you've been running it alone since then." "I have Hone." Holland works for you, she said. That's not the same as not being alone. He looked at her directly. She didn't soften it. She believed people deserved accuracy more than comfort, and she believed that long before she ever set foot in a clinical setting. The night I came off that elevator, she said quietly. What happened to you when you smelled the soup? A long silence. I don't know how to explain it. Try. He turned the cup again. It was like a door opening in a part of the house I thought I'd locked permanently. He paused. I stood at that window for 40 minutes after you left. She was quiet. I told myself it was just the smell. Nostalgia. Nothing more than that. But he looked at her the way he looked at almost nothing. Openly. Without the layer of controlled distance he wore everywhere else. The way he looked when he had run out of reasons not to. My mother used to say the kitchen is the only room in a house that tells the truth, he said. That you can lie anywhere else, but not there. That what you cook and how you cook it shows exactly who you are. She sounds like my grandmother. What did your grandmother say? She smiled, private, warm, the smile of a memory that still had its full weight. She said a meal made with worry feeds the belly. A meal made with love feeds everything else. The kitchen held that for a moment. Simone, the way he said her name, careful, like something carried a long distance and only now being set down, did something to the air in her chest. I know you're leaving next week, he said. I know this was an arrangement with terms, and you have a life that exists entirely outside of any of this. He stopped. But I need to say something before you go. Not as your employer. Just as... He stopped again. I don't have a word for what I am right now. Say it anyway. He reached across the counter and covered her hand with his. She looked at his hand, then at his face. I haven't felt like a person in 8 years, he said. Not a man. Just a position. A function. Something that makes decisions and keeps things running and doesn't feel much of anything. He held her gaze. 3 weeks in that kitchen with you, and I don't know what to do with how much I feel. I don't have the practice for it. Her eyes went warm. She didn't look away. Taeyong, I'm not asking you to stay, he said. I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know. She looked at him a long moment. Then she turned her hand over under his until their palms were flat together. The jjigae, she said quietly. The paste you left on the counter without a note. The rinsed cornbread pan at 6 in the morning. She pressed her thumb lightly to the inside of his wrist. Pulse point, muscle memory, the habit of a woman trained to check what the body was actually saying. His pulse was not steady. Neither was hers. I already knew, Taeyong. I've known for a while. He leaned across the counter slowly, like a question he already knew the answer to. She didn't move away. His forehead came to rest against hers. Just at first. The warmth of it. The exhale of two people who had been careful for weeks and were finally, quietly, done being careful. When he kissed her, it arrived the way he did everything. Without announcement, without theater, with complete intention. She felt the way he held her face like something precious and breakable, the way his breath changed, the way 8 years of silence lived in that single point of contact and slowly, finally, released. She felt it move through her chest and settle somewhere permanent. When they pulled back, she was looking at him, and he was looking at her. The city glittered cold and indifferent behind the glass, and neither of them said anything because there was nothing that needed to be said. Then, softly, she said, "Your mother was right about the kitchen." He made a sound that was almost a laugh, broken open and gentle at the same time. She reached up and touched the scar on his jaw, lightly, once, the way she'd wanted to since the very first night. He closed his eyes. She had 1 week left. Neither of them knew what to do with that. The last week moved the way the last of anything moves, too fast in the days and too slow in the hours. They didn't talk about what had happened in the kitchen. They didn't need to. It lived in the way he sat at the counter now, without pretending he had a reason to. In the way she set his plate like she already knew where he'd be. In the way Hoan had gone very quiet. Not coldly, not dramatically, just the specific quiet of a person who has adjusted privately to something they were never going to say out loud. Collins visited the penthouse on the last Saturday. He stood in the entryway, taking in the windows and the city below and the composed, expensive silence of the place. Taeyong came out of his office, and they stood across from each other for the first time. Collins had his shoulders set like a man expecting a verdict. "I know I owe you more than money," he said. "I know that." Taeyong was quiet for a moment. You owe your sister more than you owe either of us. Collins glanced at Simone. She raised one eyebrow at him that said, exactly what I've been telling you. They ate together that afternoon, all four of them, which had never happened before. Mr. Beck arrived uninvited, as he always did, and made himself at home, as he always did, and spent the meal stealing cornbread and watching Taeyong and Simone with the open, unashamed delight of a man watching something he had quietly hoped for. At one point, he said something to Taeyong in Korean, low and amused. Taeyong kept eating. Simone looked between them. What did he say? Mr. Beck answered before Taeyong could. I said you have done in 3 weeks what 8 years of very expensive silence could not. Which is... Mr. Beck smiled, made him look like himself again. Taeyong put his chopsticks down and stared at the table. Collins laughed, genuinely, for the first time in weeks. And Simone looked at her brother's face and felt something loose in her chest that had been wound tight since she'd boarded the plane. The afternoon stretched long and warm. The kind of afternoon that knows it is the last of its kind and doesn't hurry. Nobody said that out loud. The food said it. The way everyone ate slowly said it. The way Taeyong refilled her water glass without being asked, twice, said it in the particular language he had been speaking the entire time she'd known him. That evening, Collins took a car to his apartment to pack. Departure terminal by morning. Simone stood at the window watching the taillights until she couldn't see them anymore. Taeyong came and stood beside her. She had been preparing what to say for 3 days. She had versions of it. Gracious, clean, honest, the kind of goodbye that honored what had happened without trying to make it hold more than it could. What she said was, I don't want to go. He was quiet. Then don't. That's not a real answer. I know. He turned toward her. Come back. Not as an arrangement. Not because of Collins. Come back because you want to see what this becomes. I have a life to finish, she said. An exam. A career that doesn't exist yet. I know. You live in Seoul. I know that too. This is complicated. Yes. She looked at him. The scar, the dark eyes, the man underneath the position that she had found one evening at a time in a kitchen that had been silent for 8 years. Ask me properly, she said. He took her hand the way he'd taken it across the counter. Deliberate, unhurried, like a man who had thought very carefully about what exactly he was reaching for. When you have finished what you started, he said, when you have passed your exam and built the thing you went home to build, come back to me. Not because you owe me anything, because you want to find out what this is. She looked down at their hands. He pulled her close, slowly, the way he did everything. The way a question is asked when the person asking already suspects the answer but respects the other person enough to ask properly. She let him. She pressed her face against his chest and felt him breathe and felt both his arms come around her and hold on in the particular way of a man who had not held anyone in a very long time and was remembering how important it was. She pulled back. Her eyes were wet. She didn't apologize. He kissed her forehead, her cheek, then her mouth, soft and unhurried and certain, the way a period ends a sentence that has been a long time coming. She held the front of his jacket with both hands and kissed him back with 3 weeks of accumulated feeling and carefully maintained restraint. And when they finally separated, she was looking at him, and he was looking at her, and outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Seoul shimmered in its cold and beautiful indifference to everything that was happening on the 32nd floor. She stepped back, breathed. Then she went to the counter and picked up the flask. The same steel flask she had gripped in this room the very first night, slightly dented from 3 weeks of use, carrying the ghost of every meal she'd made in it. She turned in her hands once. She set it down in front of him. Keep it, she said, and learn how to fill it. He looked at the flask. He looked at her. She picked up her bag. At the elevator, she turned around once. He was still at the counter, both hands wrapped around the flask, watching her with the expression of a man who had spent 8 years perfecting the art of needing nothing, and was now standing in the quiet wreckage of that, not afraid of it, not broken by it, just open in a way he hadn't been since he was 25 years old, and his mother was still alive, and the kitchen still smelled like Friday. Taeyong. Yes. The jiggy you had that first time. She pressed the elevator button. I made it better the second time. He almost smiled. I know. You never said so. You always already know, he said. The doors closed. She leaned against the wall of the elevator and pressed her fingers to her mouth and breathed all the way down. On the street, the Seoul night was loud and cold, and completely unbothered by what had just happened 32 floors above it. She stepped into it, let the cold hit her face, didn't look back at the building. She didn't need to. Some things don't need to be looked at to be felt. Some things follow you home not because they're haunting you, but because they've made a quiet, permanent decision to belong to you. Behind her, on the 32nd floor, Kwon Taeyong stood alone at his kitchen counter for the first time in 3 weeks. He looked at the flask. He looked at the stove. He filled a small pot with water, set it on the burner, and turned the heat to low. He had no idea what to do next. But for the first time in 8 years, he was looking forward to finding out. And if this story moved something in you, if you felt that kitchen, that elevator, that last goodbye, then you already know what to do. Subscribe and stay close, because the stories told here are built for people who feel things deeply and aren't ashamed of it. Leave a comment and tell us, did you think he was going to let her walk out that door? Because the answer says everything about who you are.